On May 28, 1940, at the Reich Air Ministry in Berlin, Reich Marshal Hermann Göring placed an intelligence report on his desk with a sneer of absolute contempt. The file described President Roosevelt's unprecedented appeal to Congress, which called for a massive expansion of American industrial power and a production capacity of 50,000 aircraft per year. Göring assured his staff that the Americans were acting out of desperation, using such propaganda to mask their ignorance of war production. He reasoned that their automobile factories could not simply be converted to military use, as building warplanes required complex skills far beyond the scope of a standard assembly line.
Yet Göring failed to realize that in Detroit, a Danish immigrant named William Knudsen was already dismantling those assumptions. Formerly the president of General Motors, Knudsen was now serving as Roosevelt's production chief for a symbolic salary of $1 per year, quietly orchestrating the most ambitious industrial transformation in human history. Within 4 years, American manufacturers would not only meet the dismissal-worthy target of 50,000 planes, but would nearly double it, producing 100,000 aircraft annually, or supplying 2 separate theaters of war across opposite oceans.
The declaration that had provoked such scorn in Berlin was made on May 16, 1940, while German panzers were tearing through the French countryside. Standing before Congress, Franklin Roosevelt announced, "I should like to see this nation geared up to the ability to turn out at least 50,000 planes a year." The goal was met with skepticism, even among allies, as America had produced only 3,611 military aircraft in 1939. The Army Air Corps itself possessed just 1,700 combat planes, many of which were already obsolete. Despite the daunting requirement for a 14-fold increase in output, William Knudsen became the architect of this industrial miracle. When asked who could possibly achieve such numbers, presidential advisor Bernard Baruch replied simply, "First, Bill Knudsen. Second, Bill Knudsen. Third, Bill Knudsen." Having forfeited his $300,000 salary to serve his adopted nation, Knudsen applied the principles of automotive mass production to aviation. By December 1941, output had surged 20-fold to 2,000 military aircraft per month, with Ford, Boeing, and Douglas aircraft launching massive expansions. The Nazi leadership's dismissal of this American potential was driven by a fatal combination of racial prejudice and willful blindness. General Friedrich von Bottcher, the Wehrmacht military attaché in Washington from 1933 to 1941, had sent accurate cables warning that American war production would reach unimaginable heights. However, Berlin rejected these reports as defeatist exaggerations, and when Bottcher met with Hitler in February 1939, the Führer ignored the intelligence assessments, choosing instead to rant about American racial degeneracy. Hitler proclaimed that the Americans were a half-Judaized, half-Negrified people incapable of sustained warfare, a delusion that permeated the entire German command. Luftwaffe intelligence disregarded reports of women entering factories as a sign of desperation rather than a doubling of the workforce, and they refused to believe that a democratic mobilization could outperform a totalitarian command. Even as evidence arrived of factories running 3 shifts a day, the Nazi worldview simply could not accommodate the reality of American industrial power. The Ford Motor Company's Willow Run plant became the physical embodiment of this ambition. Construction began on farmland on April 18, 1941, eventually creating the world's largest factory under one roof, covering 3.5 million square feet with an assembly line stretching 1 mile. Charles Sorensen, Ford's production chief, promised to build 1 B-24 Liberator bomber every hour. A staggering claim given that other factories struggled to produce 1 per day. Initial results were catastrophic, with the first bomber completed in September 1942, requiring a total rebuild and quality control failures reaching 50%.
Critics mocked the plant with the nickname "Will It Run?" as monthly production in February 1943 stalled at just 56 bombers against promises of hundreds. However, Ford engineers persevered, breaking the B-24's 488,193 parts into manageable subassemblies and introducing hydraulic riveting tools and prefabricated wiring harnesses. The engineers successfully integrated 578 design changes in 1943 alone, and by September, monthly production had climbed to 148 bombers. By December, that number reached 365, and the true breakthrough came in April 1944, when Willow Run produced 428 B-24s. The factory was now churning out one plane every 63 minutes, 24 hours a day, effectively outproducing the entire German aviation industry on its own. German pilots first recognized the shift in power during the Tunisia campaign, where the sheer number of American aircraft became overwhelming. In December 1942, Major Johannes Steinhoff of JG-77 noted, "The American pilots are no longer amateurs. Most disturbing, there are more of them every day." The pressure intensified throughout 1943, beginning with the first American raid on Germany itself on January 27th, when 64 bombers attacked Wilhelmshaven. By October, during the disastrous Black Thursday raid on Schweinfurt, the Americans lost 60 B-17s. Yet, they proved capable of replacing those losses within just 2 weeks. The mathematics of the war had become inescapable. During Big Week, from February 20th to 25th, 1944, the 8th and 15th Air Forces mounted 3,500 sorties against German production, while the Luftwaffe lost between 262 and 355 fighters. The decisive blow was the loss of approximately 100 irreplaceable veteran pilots. General Adolf Galland reported the grim reality to Göring. Germany was losing 1,200 fighters monthly while producing only 1,000, whereas America was manufacturing 2,500 fighters a month while losing just 400. Major Heinz Baer, an ace with 220 victories, described the hopelessness of a January 1944 mission over Brunswick. He recalled a bomber stream stretching from horizon to horizon, consisting of at least 700 flying fortresses and liberators. Against such a force, their 8 fighters were utterly powerless. In that single year alone, American assembly lines delivered a staggering 96,270 aircraft, a massive fleet comprising 35,743 fighters, 22,591 multi-engine planes, and 16,048 four-engine bombers. To put this industrial avalanche into perspective, that 1 year of U.S. output surpassed Germany's total production for the entire war, which stood at approximately 94,677 units. Yet, the gap was not merely numerical. It was a fundamental chasm in quality and resources. While every American bomber took to the skies bristling with 13.50 caliber machine guns and ample ammunition, German interceptors were frequently forced to launch with only partial loads. U.S. crews benefited from powered turrets, cutting-edge bomb sights, and advanced navigation systems, whereas their Luftwaffe counterparts often faced combat without even a functioning radio. The speed of manufacturing defied belief. By May 1944, Boeing's Plant 2 in Seattle was completing 16 B-17s every single day. Douglas Aircraft, a company with merely 68 employees in 1936, had exploded into an empire of 167,000 workers, spanning 9 factories. North American Aviation maintained a rhythm of 500 P-51 Mustangs per month, while Lockheed rolled out a P-38 Lightning every 90 minutes, simultaneously integrating 2,127 modifications dictated by combat experience. The supporting infrastructure matched this frenetic tempo, with General Motors manufacturing 57,658 aircraft engines under license, and Packard contributing another 55,523 Rolls-Royce Merlins. Raw material supplies surged to meet the demand, as Alcoa boosted aluminum output by 600%, and Dow Chemical skyrocketed its magnesium production from a pre-war 6 million to an astounding 333 million pounds annually. This industrial miracle was driven by a workforce transformation that completely dismantled Nazi assumptions. In 1941, women made up less than 1% of aviation workers. Yet, by 1943, they accounted for 65%, totaling 310,000 across the industry. At the Douglas Long Beach facility alone, 22,038 of the 41,062 employees were women, proving to be the backbone of production. Rose Will Monroe, the real-life inspiration for Rosie the Riveter, set the standard at Willow Run, driving 3,000 rivets per shift with 99.5% accuracy. This attention to detail was systemic. Female inspectors at Douglas slashed defect rates from 3.2% down to a mere 0.3%. When Ford redesigned tools to fit smaller hands, they inadvertently revolutionized efficiency, as lighter pneumatic equipment reduced fatigue, and ergonomic workstations significantly lowered injury rates. German intelligence catastrophically misread this shift as a sign of desperation, with one captured Luftwaffe report dismissing these workers as temporary and predicting a collapse in quality. Reality proved the opposite. Precision soared as women excelled in intricate tasks like wiring and instrumentation. Far from a weakness, the integration of women into the workforce became a testament to democratic resilience and strength. While American output reached new heights, Germany retreated into delusion, with Göring authorizing the Jägerstab program in February 1944. This desperate initiative dispersed production across 729 underground facilities reliant on slave labor, such as the Mittelwerk complex, where 60,000 prisoners toiled in horrific conditions that claimed 20,000 lives. The result was a logistical nightmare. These subterranean factories generated more defects than functional aircraft, as slave laborers actively sabotaged components. Transporting parts between scattered sites caused crippling delays, leading to a total collapse of quality control. Ultimately, the entire Mittelwerk complex failed to match the monthly engine output of Ford's single plant in Chicago. Conversely, American innovation was accelerating, exemplified by Boeing's modular construction of the B-29 across 4 different facilities, using completely interchangeable parts. This pressurized bomber, costing $65,000 each, incorporated technology that Germany could not match even in prototypes. And by early 1945, the US was delivering 100 of these superfortresses every month. The culmination of this industrial might was unveiled on June 6, 1944. The Allied invasion force commanded 11,590 aircraft against a meager 319 German sorties, establishing a 36-to-1 superiority that represented not just a tactical advantage, but total industrial annihilation. In the months leading up to the invasion, from January to May 1944, Allied preparatory raids dropped 145,000 tons of bombs on German targets, a figure exceeding the total tonnage Germany dropped on Britain during the entire war. On D-Day itself, the airlift of 3 airborne divisions required a fleet larger than the entire transport capacity Germany possessed at any point in the conflict. By December 1944, the scale of air warfare had become overwhelming, with single raids comprised of 1,200 bombers shielded by 900 fighters. The P-51 Mustangs, capable of reaching Poland and matching any adversary in performance, were produced in such vast quantities that combat losses became strategically irrelevant. German pilots, overwhelmed by enemies that seemed to swarm everywhere at once, resignedly referred to them as Indians. As the end drew near, the Nazi leadership was forced to confront the production catastrophe. Joseph Goebbels confided in his diary in December 1944 that Göring's promises of Luftwaffe superiority had become criminal delusions, admitting that they were fighting the world's greatest industrial power with mere rhetoric. Similarly, prior to D-Day, Field Marshal Rommel warned his staff that the Americans could afford to lose 10 tanks for every German one destroyed and still prevail, predicting that their material superiority would shatter any defensive position. Even Hitler conceded the point to Albert Speer in January 1945, lamenting that they should have heeded Böttcher's reports regarding America's decisive industrial potential, acknowledging that while Germany built hundreds, the Americans built tens of thousands. Speer himself later testified that strategic bombing had slashed German production by 35% for tanks, 31% for aircraft, and 42% for trucks, unequivocally stating that these systematic attacks on industry caused the complete breakdown of German armaments. Germany's Me-262, operational by mid-1944, represented a genuine leap in innovation, boasting speeds 100 miles per hour faster than any Allied fighter. Hitler and Göring clung to the belief that this wonder weapon could restore air superiority despite the odds. Yet Germany managed to produce only 1,430 of these jets in total, with never more than 200 operational at any one time. The German jets were plagued by logistical failures. Engines required overhauls every 10 hours, and shortages of critical materials forced the use of inferior substitutes. In contrast, the United States, having started jet development in 1942, demonstrated its immense industrial depth. While the early Bell P-59 was underwhelming, Lockheed's P-80 Shooting Star, superior to any German jet, entered production before the war's end, proving America could simultaneously pursue multiple advanced technologies, a luxury Germany could not afford. This contrast epitomized the outcome of the production war. Germany's fleeting technological edge in jets was rendered meaningless by America's capacity to churn out thousands of conventional fighters while developing the next generation of aircraft. In the context of total war, quality without quantity proved futile. When Hermann Göring was arrested on May 8, 1945, by the U.S. 36th Infantry Division, it marked the final collision between his delusions and the undeniable reality of American industrial power. While initially held at the interrogation center in Augsburg, the prisoner remained defiant, insisting that German technology was technically superior and had only been vanquished by brute numerical force. However, his demeanor began to shift following his transfer to Camp Ashcan in Luxembourg, a specialized facility for high-ranking Nazi captives, where he was subjected to far more rigorous questioning. In July 1945, Major Kenneth Heckler undertook a series of in-depth interviews that captured Göring's growing realization of American industrial dominance. The Reichsmarschall confessed to Heckler that, while he had been aware of America's potential, the actual execution had surpassed his darkest nightmares, noting with disbelief that the single Willow Run facility produced more aircraft than the entire German bomber fleet at its zenith. He was particularly astounded by the logistical feats required to supply troops across two vast oceans, without disrupting domestic output, a concept that was utterly alien to the German command. Göring lamented that while the Wehrmacht struggled to provision forces merely 500 miles from their borders, the United States successfully sustained armies 5,000 miles from its shores. Throughout the Nuremberg trials, prosecutors confronted the defendant with irrefutable data, illustrating the sheer scale of American manufacturing supremacy. He was shown charts demonstrating that by 1944, the United States was building more planes every month than Germany could manufacture in a full year, accompanied by footage of Willow Run's assembly lines, juxtaposed with lists of German cities decimated by the very bombers rolling off those belts.
During his testimony on March 14, 1946, Göring openly struggled to grasp the magnitude of this expansion, admitting that while he had respected American economic potential, he never conceived that aircraft production could increase 100-fold in just 4 years. To his mind, such an exponential explosion in industrial output seemed physically impossible.
The prison psychologist, G.M. Gilbert, recorded the former Reich Marshal's fixation on production metrics, noting how he would obsessively calculate ratios to compare individual American plants against the entirety of German output. His focus returned repeatedly to Willow Run, which he bitterly referred to as that damned factory, responsible for breaking the Luftwaffe's back.
When presented with the definitive figures showing that America manufactured 812,615 aircraft engines compared to Germany's 241,675, Göring could only stare at the document in silence. Faced with these hard numbers, the mathematical inevitability of their defeat became undeniable.
Even by modern standards, the scope of this industrial transformation remains staggering. From a mere 3,611 military aircraft in 1940, the nation produced nearly 300,000 by the war's end. This arsenal included over 97,000 bombers and 99,000 fighters, representing not just a triumph of quantity, but a systemic superiority in every facet of production. At its peak, the industry employed 2 million Americans, harnessing an unprecedented diversity that included women, African Americans, Mexican Americans, Native Americans, the disabled, and citizens of all ages. This democratic mobilization achieved what totalitarian mandates could not, proving that voluntary cooperation could outpace the output of forced labor by every conceivable metric. Workers who entered the factories in 1941 with no prior aviation knowledge emerged 4 years later as the most skilled labor force on the planet. Beyond simply building planes, they revolutionized the manufacturing process itself, establishing statistical quality control methods for bomber production that would eventually become the standard for industries worldwide. The automation principles pioneered at Willow Run reshaped global manufacturing, bridging the gap between wartime necessity and future exploration. The same engineers who designed bomber assembly lines would later craft the Saturn V rocket. This production miracle did far more than secure victory. It laid the groundwork for the space age and effectively launched the American century. The financial scale of this endeavor defied all economic orthodoxy, consuming $45 billion, equivalent to $800 billion today, with the B-29 program alone costing more than the Manhattan Project. Yet, rather than bankrupting the nation, this massive investment in war production generated unprecedented prosperity and vanquished the unemployment of the Great Depression. Personal income doubled between 1940 and 1945, and much of this expansion was financed by the workers themselves. Employees at Willow Run alone purchased $45 million in war bonds, effectively funding the very operations they staffed through their own financial contributions. Conversely, while Germany dedicated 40% of its entire industrial capacity to aircraft production by 1944, it managed to produce less than half of the American output. Their increasing reliance on slave labor proved catastrophically counterproductive, resulting in endemic sabotage, collapsing quality, and a decline in worker productivity, whereas American productivity surged by 300%. The massive infrastructure constructed for the war effort seamlessly became the foundation for post-war prosperity, as aluminum smelters, originally built for bombers, began producing materials for suburban housing. Chemical plants, once dedicated to aviation fuel, shifted to creating plastics for consumer goods, while machine tool factories equipped American industry for an era of global dominance. Beyond sheer volume lay a triumph of organizational excellence, where the War Production Board seamlessly coordinated 184,000 companies, and IBM punch-card machines tracked millions of components across a vast network of suppliers. Simultaneously, the 4,000 scientists at MIT's Radiation Laboratory developed advanced navigation systems that granted American bombers true all-weather capability. When combat experience exposed the B-17's vulnerability to frontal attacks, Boeing integrated chin turrets within a mere 60 days and consolidated modified B-24s for extended Pacific ranges without ever halting production lines. While German modifications often required agonizing months or even years to implement, American improvements were executed in weeks, proving that adaptability was just as decisive as production volume. American aircraft evolved continuously, fueled by a rapid flow of information that carried combat data from Pacific battles to Atlantic production lines in a matter of days. In contrast to static German designs produced in isolated underground facilities, American engineering improved weekly thanks to a dynamic feedback loop between the front lines and the factories. This unprecedented efficiency ensured that pilot observations reached engineers immediately, while technical solutions were implemented on assembly lines within days. Workers on the floor could send suggestions directly to designers, creating a democratic flow of information that proved vastly superior to the rigid, hierarchical command structure of the German war machine. On October 15, 1946, mere hours before he was scheduled to face execution, Hermann Göring penned his final correspondence, offering a stark confession regarding the true nature of the war. In this ultimate admission, he acknowledged that the Allied victory was not secured by superior infantry or military prowess, but by overwhelming industrial might. Germany was not vanquished by better soldiers, but was dismantled by superior factories. He lamented that the very nation they had scorned as a mere manufacturer of consumer trinkets had ultimately buried the Wehrmacht beneath a mountain of aluminum and steel. In his final statement to the prison psychologist Gilbert, Göring revealed the fatal error of awakening a sleeping industrial giant, noting that once America stirred, the Third Reich was doomed. The United States did not merely outpace German output, they completely revolutionized the concept of manufacturing, proving their system superior in every conceivable metric. Although Göring took his own life that night, his final testimony endures as history's ultimate verdict on the battle of production. The Reichsmarshal, who had once scoffed at American potential, died with the crushing knowledge that a single enemy factory had surpassed the total lifetime output of his entire air force. A fact that military historians now consider the decisive element in the Allied triumph. Without this overwhelming material dominance, pivotal operations like D-Day would have been logistical impossibilities. The strategic bombing campaigns could not have been sustained, and victory in the Pacific would have remained out of reach. As Richard Overy, a preeminent historian of the air war, concluded, the conflict was decided not by martial spirit or tactical genius, but by the sheer weight of material. The Allied forces secured victory simply by burying their adversaries under an unstoppable avalanche of manufactured goods. The statistical record supports this assessment without qualification. By 1944, the United States was manufacturing more military aircraft than the rest of the world combined, tallying more than both Axis and Allied powers put together. This was not merely a case of incremental superiority, but a dominance of an entirely different order of magnitude, meaning Germany was not simply staring at defeat, but at total and inevitable obliteration. However, the significance of this production miracle transcended the battlefield, serving as a testament to the superiority of democracy over dictatorship and the advantage of liberty over tyranny. It demonstrated that the strength of voluntary cooperation far exceeds that of forced obedience, as the workforce driving this transformation consisted not of slaves or conscripts, but of free citizens united by a common purpose. Hermann Göring's arrogant dismissal of American capacity remains one of history's most catastrophic miscalculations. A contempt for democratic potential that ultimately cost Germany the war and millions of lives. His failure to comprehend the true capabilities of the United States sealed the fate of the Third Reich long before the first Allied bomber ever cast its shadow over German skies. The industrial surge from 3,000 to 100,000 aircraft annually proved that free societies, when confronted with existential threats, can achieve the seemingly impossible. American workers did not merely meet President Roosevelt's audacious targets, they doubled them, exceeding German production fivefold, even while simultaneously waging a massive campaign across the Pacific. Modern leaders would be wise to heed the lesson of Göring's error. To dismiss democratic nations as weak simply because they are peaceful, or to underestimate the productive capacity of a free people who prefer prosperity to conquest, is to invite disaster. In 1940, America appeared woefully unprepared for conflict, yet by 1944, it had evolved into an unstoppable industrial colossus. The arsenal of democracy proved that assembly lines could be just as decisive as front lines, that the manufacturing worker was as crucial as the soldier, and that the mobilization of industry could dictate victory as surely as any military strategy. It was a lesson Hermann Göring learned only when it was too late, paid for with the absolute destruction of his nation. From his sneering reaction to Roosevelt's announcement in May 1940 to his scheduled execution at Nuremberg in October 1946, Göring's personal journey mirrored the arc of Nazi Germany's ruin. His contempt for American industry became the epitaph for the Third Reich, a regime that fatally confused ideology with capability and believed that racial mythology could somehow overcome the hard reality of industrial mathematics. The Reichsmarshal died with the bitter knowledge that American factories had churned out more planes in 1944 alone than Germany managed to build throughout the entire duration of the war. His mockery of democratic industrial capacity transformed into history's most expensive joke, the punchline of which was delivered in the currency of total and absolute defeat. While the numbers are staggering, America produced 295,959 military aircraft compared to Germany's 94,677. The true victory lay in the method. It proved definitively that free workers could outproduce slave labor, that democratic cooperation surpasses totalitarian command, and that a diverse nation of immigrants could unite to achieve the impossible. The B-24 bombers rolling off the Willow Run assembly line every 63 minutes were more than mere machines. They were democracy's physical answer to tyranny. Every rivet driven by a former housewife, every engine built by a teenager who left school to serve, and every wing assembled by those fleeing poverty represented the collective will of a free people. Ultimately, these efforts proved that free nations, united in a righteous cause, could bury tyranny under an avalanche of production. Göring had laughed at the notion of America producing 50,000 planes annually, but the United States responded by producing double that figure, burying him and everything he represented under 300,000 aircraft, turning his contempt into history's most complete defeat.